When I showed up for my first compassion-focused therapy workshop with Professor Paul Gilbert, I mistakenly thought that we were going to spend 3 days talking about how to be nicer, kinder to each other, and maybe even ourselves. What happened during that first morning was a revelation. "We all have tricky brains," he said in his Derbyshire way. Let me tell you what he means and what this has to do with compassion. Compassion-focused therapy, or CFT, is an evolutionary-based approach, and CFT begins with developing insight and understanding of our human brains that have evolved over millions of years, designed for us, not by us. We have all sorts of old brain motives, emotions, and behavioural urges. Motives such as threat protection, reproduction, competition, and care. Emotions such as anger, anxiety, sadness, and joy. And behavioural urges such as fight, flight, freeze, appease, courting, and nurturing. But humans also developed certain new brain functions as well. We can imagine, remember, plan ahead, learn from experience, take others' perspectives, and be aware of ourselves in space and time and in interaction with the group. All powerful stuff. The problem is evolution focuses on survival and reproduction, not happiness. And from a CFT point of view, one source of our suffering is our tricky brains, the difficult motives, emotions, and behavioural urges of the old brain, and the way the functions of our new brains get us all caught up in distressing loops of the mind. Fearful imagining, regret and rumination, perfectionism, procrastination, self-consciousness, self-criticism, the list goes on. All of these are a result of our tricky brains and distressing old brain, new brain loops. My Labrador Bruno doesn't go through loops of the mind. He doesn't regret his past or worry about his future. He doesn't criticise himself for aspects of his appearance or fret over whether I like him or love him. But we humans do. I wish that hadn't happened. What if this does happen? You idiot, you are so this and that. So that first morning of that first CFT workshop with Professor Paul Gilbert surprised me in a way. Evolution has given us tricky brains and tricky bodies, and a lot of our suffering comes from all that. It's not our fault, but CFT goes on to work out ways to help us manage all of that. "10 years ago, I had no idea about the soothing affiliative system of the brain. But through compassion-focused therapy and the work of Professor Paul Gilbert, I've learnt that there are 3 key systems of our evolved brains that regulate our emotions: threat, drive, and soothing. The threat system is focused on threat protection. It's the fight, flight, freeze, appease part of the brain, and it's textured with feelings of anger, anxiety and disgust. It's the dominant system, and needs to be from an evolutionary point of view, ensuring the survival of our species. But it's tricky. The threat system is activated by physical threats, but also social threats. We are most concerned about disapproval, rejection, exclusion, and isolation from others, all of which meant certain death for the prehistoric human. The drive system is energizing, activating, and motivates us towards seeking and obtaining resources, food, sex, material possession, and social status. And it comes along with excitement, pleasure, joy, and a sense of striving and achievement. This system is tricky too. It can be unrelenting, insatiable, always striving for more or better, falling into perfectionism and sensation-seeking. We can experience threat-based drive or insecure striving, which is exhausting and can lead to disappointment, failure, and self-criticism. But it's the third system, the soothing affiliative system that intrigued me when I encountered CFT. We are a vulnerable species, not big and strong and able to fight off threats. Nor are we quick and able to run away, but we had each other, and this is the soothing affiliative system, our tendency to look after each other, especially vulnerable others, to care for, nurture, protect each other, and to feel safe and soothed when we're close and connected with others. When the soothing system is activated, we feel calm and content, a sense of warmth, friendliness and kindness, and a sense of well-being. We survived by being able to give and receive care. In CFT, we work hard to develop skills to bring these three systems into balance. We don't want to get rid of threat or drive, they're important too. But we do want to develop our soothing affiliative system. It's not easy, and sometimes life experiences can make activating our soothing affiliative system difficult. But over time, we can start to develop a soothing system that is a safe haven for down-regulating our threat system and a secure base from which to move into healthy drive. The year was 2014 and I still had not seen Good Will Hunting. I know. It was released in 1997. But yeah, there I was at the Introduction to Compassion Focused Therapy workshop presented by Professor Paul Gilbert. And he started playing a clip from the movie. What's this got to do with compassion and self-compassion? Well, compassion is first and foremost about trying to not blame or shame ourselves or others for the suffering we all experience. So let's set the scene. Sean Maguire, the psychologist played by Robin Williams, is speaking with Will Hunting, played by Matt Damon. They're standing in Sean's office and Sean is holding Will's personal file. They're discussing Will's childhood abuse at the hands of his foster father. At some point, Sean says, "Hey Will, I don't know a lot, but you see this? All this shit. It's not your fault." Will kind of fobs it off. "Yeah, I know that," he says. But Sean persists. "Look at me, son. It's not your fault." "I know," says Will, starting to look very dubious. The conversation continues, with Sean repeating, "It's not your fault." And Will going through all sorts of emotions. From dubious, he moves to anger. From anger, he moves to rage and violence, pushing Sean away. And finally, from rage to grief and despair. By the end, Will is in tears and embraces Sean, sobbing, crying out, oh God, I'm so sorry." This is so important in compassion, and especially self-compassion. We can feel such shame about ourselves, and we can take all the blame for what's happened in our lives, all of our suffering. But it's not our fault. We have tricky brains that were designed for us, and we're shaped by life experiences, especially the experiences we had being cared for or not cared for. And none of this is our fault. We didn't get a choice as a child, but even as an adult, many of our choices now are still influenced by experiences tracing all the way back. Good Will Hunting and the exquisite performances of Robin Williams and Matt Damon reminds us that our suffering is not our fault. We de-shame and de-blame ourselves for our own suffering. Then we are truly able to work out what we can do that will be helpful so we may suffer less. I will never forget the first time that I was introduced to mindfulness meditation. It was many years ago now, and it was through Father Terry Fitzpatrick here in Brisbane. The experience was all at once challenging, frustrating, exposing, beautiful, sublime, peaceful. Mindfulness is part of ancient wisdom and spiritual traditions. In some ways, mindfulness is also simply being present for your life. And we can practice this present moment awareness across different layers of experience. One popular definition by meditation pioneer Jon Kabat-Zinn is that mindfulness is bringing our attention non-judgmentally and purposefully to the present moment. Another definition I found really helpful is by James Baraz. Mindfulness is simply being aware of what is happening right now, without wishing it were different. Enjoying the pleasant without holding on when it changes, which it will. Being with the unpleasant without fearing it will always be this way, which it won't. Being mindful means being consciously aware of our thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and behaviours as they arise. It can also include awakening our senses in the present moment around us and observing what we can see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. Mindfulness is a pathway to compassion. It helps us to step out of autopilot and into a state of present moment awareness and non-judgmental attention. We notice the experiences of others and ourselves. This allows us and encourages us to connect with our wisdom. We can then make choices about how we want to respond, rather than being reactive, rather than clinging or pushing away, rather than struggling. This is especially true of bringing our conscious mind to moments of suffering. This is a moment of suffering. What could I do next that would be helpful? It's not easy. The busy human brain naturally seeks constant distraction. And it's very tempting to think, oh, I'm not good at being mindful. You're not alone. Remember that everyone's brain has a tendency to do this. So be gentle with yourself and quietly bring your attention back to the task at hand. There's no right or wrong way to practice mindfulness. Rather, it's a process of remembering to be aware of the present moment, noticing when that awareness drifts away and remembering to return to the practice. Abseiling taught me something very important about safety versus safeness. Here's what happened. I was 13 and on a school camp, and I was scared. What if the rope breaks? What if I fall? What if I make a fool of myself? My mouth was dry, my hands were shaking, and I was hyper-focused on making sure that the harness was properly attached, the rope was properly through the carabiner, and the carabiner was properly locked off. This is safety mode. The instructor gave me a high five and said, "You'll be all right." And off I went to the edge of the cliff. Someone from below called out, "On belay!" Backing over the edge, my heart rate went up even higher. I was super focused on my hands clutching the rope, glancing again at the carabiner. Will it hold me? Still safety. And then a turning point. I eased back on the rope, and in a few steps I went from upright to horizontal. And it was wonderful. The rope supported me, and I quickly got the hang of loosening the rope and moving down the cliff. All the checks were done, I was out on the cliff, and suddenly I was feeling safe. This is safeness. I started looking around. I looked up at the instructor, who was smiling and giving me a thumbs up. I looked out at the view, to the lake, and beyond to the mountains. I started to play with my feet against the cliff face, moving about, bouncing out from the cliff and landing safely back. And then off I went, rappelling down to the base and to the hoops and hollers of my mates. Safeness. Safety mode arises from the threat system as a means of seeking protection. When we're in safety mode, our attention narrows. We imagine all the possible threats and we focus on dealing with possible danger and preventing bad things from happening. Safeness is associated with the soothing system. We feel safe, settle into the moment, and become playful where we are and with what we're doing. Experiencing safeness, we have the freedom to explore, expand our horizons, and try out new things. Both safety and safeness are important. That's what abseiling taught me. We just want to be able to shift between both states and to know when safety mode might no longer be necessary and safeness is now okay, and vice versa. I have a confession to make. Sometimes I move about the world so caught up in my own threat system that I don't even notice the suffering of others. I know, it sounds bad, but maybe you can relate to this too. When we're highly threat system activated, anxious, frustrated, self-conscious, caught up in our own fight-flight response, we often assume a very internalizing mindset and a very particular posture. Head bowed, eyes downcast, furrowed brow, body tense and restless, hurried, a more brutal inner mental tone, and sometimes abrupt and harsh with what we say and how we say it. Threat system activation. Different emotional systems come along with different body and brain patterns. Compassion has its own body and brain pattern. It's useful to reflect on this via memories. Firstly, memories of being compassionate towards others. Let's give it a try. Think of a time when you were kind, caring, supportive, encouraging, helpful, compassionate towards another person. Holding a door for someone struggling with a heavy load. Helping someone with directions. Visiting a friend who's had a tough week. With this memory in mind, begin to recall, what was your body posture like? How was your body moving? What about your facial expression, your voice tone? Where were you placing your attention? How were you interacting with this other person? What were you saying or doing? The compassionate self. When we embody the compassionate self, we stand upright, yet relaxed, shoulders back, chest open, chin raised, and with a warm, friendly facial expression and voice tone. We feel strong and grounded and calm, and our attention is open, curious, aware, noticing the world around us and noticing others around us, including noticing suffering. And we feel motivated to be helpful towards others and towards ourselves, to alleviate and prevent suffering, and certainly not to cause harm. We can tap into all of this through memories of care, kindness, and compassion. And once we do, then with awareness and intention, we can notice when we're too caught up in our threat system and make the switch to the body and brain pattern of our compassionate self. I was brought up to believe in the power and goodness of being compassionate towards others. My mother was a doctor, my grandmother and grandfather were doctors, as was my great-grandfather. When I was 19, I worked at Kids Helpline, a telephone counselling service for children and adolescents here in Australia. And I proudly remember the day we launched the service nationally. Helping, healing, compassion are in the blood. So you can probably imagine my surprise when I learned about the importance of self-compassion. Self-compassion. This almost didn't compute. I need to be compassionate towards others, and I just don't deserve to use the precious time and resources I have on myself. And yet there I was, sitting on a cushion in a circle with about 60 fellow travellers, learning about self-compassion from doctors Krista Neff and Chris Germer. Being kind, supportive, encouraging towards myself. I said to Chris Germer, "I don't feel like I deserve it." And he responded with, "Stan, you'll probably always feel that way," which was a little disheartening. But what can change is how you treat yourself when you do feel that way, how you can begin to treat yourself with kindness. And he said, self-compassion is just widening your circle of compassion to also include yourself. This had a profound effect on me. But then I stumbled on the work of Professor Paul Gilbert and learned that not only might I be compassionate towards others and myself, I might also try to open myself up to receiving compassion from others. Mind blown. To be honest, that was the most difficult of all three flows of compassion. What if they think I'm soft, weak, stupid, a bad psychologist? But when I looked around, I realized that kindness, care, compassion from others sometimes came my way. Little things, like the momentary act of kindness from a stranger. Bigger things, like an old friend showing up and offering help when my child was unwell. It takes courage to be compassionate towards others. It can be difficult and distressing to work with their suffering. And it takes courage to be compassionate towards ourselves. Let's face it, that means bringing our awareness to our own suffering. And it takes courage to open ourselves up to receiving compassion from others. But it can be so important to do so for the sake of our own well-being. See if you can start to practice compassion across the three flows. And remember, courage is often the key. Among my friends, I'm famous for loving Star Wars. Famous? But I do love it. First released in 1977 when I was 6 years old, Star Wars has been ever present in my life. In episode 1 of the recent Obi-Wan Kenobi series, one line stood out to me. The Grand Inquisitor announces menacingly to the patrons of a busy inn, "Jedi cannot help what they are. Their compassion leaves a trail." Although at one level, lots of people feel like compassion is a good thing. At another level, lots of people fear it. And here, in the wisdom of Star Wars, is an example of such fears of compassion. Unfortunately, things don't go well for the specific Jedi the Grand Inquisitor is hunting. But let's think about Obi-Wan. There he is, living on the desert planet of Tatooine, watching over Luke Skywalker, 10 years having passed since the fall of Anakin Skywalker and the Jedi Order, and the rise of Darth Vader and the Galactic Empire. He's alone and despairing, feeling like an utter failure, and terribly afraid that someone will track him down, discover Luke, and destroy them both. He's in fear of the dark side. So what does he do? Well, he goes into hiding, ceases to connect with the Force, and deactivates his compassionate motivation. He becomes a hermit and seemingly helps no one. Let's consider our own fears of compassion, which also relate to our fears of the dark side. We're worried that if we're compassionate, then others will take advantage of us, view us as weak, or somehow hurt us. We fear the dark side of others. We also fear our own dark sides. What if I'm self-compassionate and I get lax or lazy, or I get self-indulgent or self-pitying? What if my self-compassion makes me selfish, greedy, or destructive? But what is it that makes the Jedi powerful? Well, of course, it's their compassion. When Luke comes of age, it is his compassion that helps him bring his father, Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, back from the dark side and into the light. In Empire Strikes Back, Luke even says to Obi-Wan's Force Ghost, "There is still good in him." And Obi-Wan, still fearing compassion, says he's more machine now than man, twisted and evil. But Luke goes ahead and saves his father anyway. It's scary. It takes a lot of courage. But when we approach our own dark sides with compassion, it can do the very same for us too. I don't like to admit it, but I'm often dogged by self-criticism. I mean, I'm a psychologist. I'm meant to be on top of this stuff, right? No, it doesn't seem to work that way. So what is self-criticism? Well, it comes in different forms and has different functions. The two main forms of self-criticism are self-improving self-criticism and self-hating self-criticism. Self-improving self-criticism makes a lot of sense. It can be very helpful to reflect on things we've done and work out what we might practice to improve. Consider the professional golfer. She doesn't only think about all the things she did well in her last competitive round. She reflects on the things she didn't do so well and works on improving that. She might notice that her short game wasn't so good, and so she gets in the practice bunker and hits 1,000 balls. Self-improving self-criticism. Self-hating self-criticism can be very difficult, painful. Sometimes our self-criticism can be attacking, condemning, and really very hostile and vicious. You might think of some of your own examples of this kind of self-criticism, and you might even wince. We can feel reluctant to reveal the very hateful, awful stuff we say to ourselves sometimes. But what sort of teacher would you want for a child you love? Would you want them to tell your child how stupid, foolish, ugly, hopeless they are? Probably not. And yet often that's exactly how we treat ourselves when faced with challenges, disappointments or frustrations. Self-hating self-criticism. Here's a problem. We often believe that the function of our self-criticism, especially that self-hating self-criticism, is somehow helpful. We believe it will motivate us, keep us on track, stop us being lazy, and help us achieve our goals. But does it? When we really listen to the critical self, hear what it has to say, how it says it, how it feels about us, and what it would like to do to us, well, we realize it actually has the opposite effect. It can demotivate us, make us feel small, and make us want to give up. Self-hating self-criticism leads to shame. What's the alternative to self-hating, shame-based self-criticism? Well, there's another part of ourselves that has aspirations for us too. Wants us to do well and succeed and live according to our values, but without the attacks, without the hate, without the shame. Of course, it's the compassionate self. Imagine the teacher you would want your child to have. Warm, supportive, validating, reassuring, encouraging, helpful. Still with one eye on learning and growing, achieving and succeeding, but no shaming. This is the compassionate self. Try it today. Bring compassion to your life's challenges, and in particular, compassionate encouragement and self-improvement. Something you'd never guess about me is that I love the Greek tragedies. Agamemnon and his family, Hippolytus, Phaedra and Theseus, and of course Oedipus, his father and mother. And the main themes of the Greek tragedies? Love, loss, power, pride, and shame. Let's think about shame from the point of view of the Greek tragedies and consider where compassion might fit in. Shame was particularly important in Greek society. Heroism and honour were emphasised, while shame was deeply feared and was therefore a powerful motivator. Shame is often in the mix of the Greek tragedies. Agamemnon, driven by the fear of shame, sacrificed his own daughter to appease the gods and make the winds blow so he could sail to Troy, only to return a decade later to be murdered by his wife in revenge for the awful infanticide. Phaedra, fearing shame, accused her stepson Hippolytus of rape in order to conceal her incestuous love for him from her husband Theseus, only to die and lead to the death of Hippolytus as a result of Theseus's rage. And Oedipus blinded himself at the horror and shame of killing his own father and marrying his mother. Stories of the powerful and deadly consequences of shame, influencing the people of ancient Greece to be good citizens. One of the ancient Greek poets, Euripides, from the 5th century BC, was rather progressive in his work. He wrote the drama Hippolytus, but in another play now lost but referenced in other works, a character is to have said, "Nothing is shameful unless it seems that way to the person who does the act." This created outrage. Shame was seen as absolutely appropriate in the context of a dreadful deed. And shame has an evolved adaptive function after all. The shameless are often those who do the dreadful deeds in the service of their own greed, status, or power. The problem is that many of us experience shame when there is no act we've done, no choices or purposive actions for which we need feel shame. Instead, shame results from our appearance or body, experiences or upbringing, or our mistakes or misadventures, aspects of ourselves outside of our control. Shame often relates to a deep, intrinsic, and yet often unnecessary sense of being no good. Perhaps there is wisdom in Euripides' quote. Euripides is known to emphasize compassion. For him, compassion required courage. It could be problematic, thwarted, abused, or even at odd with divine spite. But it was there and it was heroic. And often it was the antidote to shame. And here is the Exodus, the moral of our odyssey through the Greek tragedies. When we feel shame, we can try, and it's not easy, to bring compassion to it. We can try to connect to the ancient wisdom of the Greek poets, and perhaps Euripides in particular, and consider, how might I view this shame, this part of me or my experience that makes me feel ashamed, but from the point of view of compassion.